You can do it, come on. Hold on, cut. Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today I have a recipe for you from What's for Dessert. It's also in honor of Pie Day, so I'm making my s'mores pie, inspired of course by the classic fireside dessert. Oh, hello. It's really, really straightforward and also a little bit of a more sophisticated take on s'mores. S'more pie, take one. Pie Day is March 14th. I don't really feel like I need a particular day to celebrate pie, but if anyone is celebrating, this is a great recipe. It's actually kind of more of a tart, but you could make it in a pie plate. And also it's like, what is a pie, what is a tart? But I think with March, it's a challenge. In the Northeast, we don't have all the exciting spring produce yet, so your options are kind of like apple, pear, or a custard pie. And so this is actually a no-bake filling. So it is kind of an easy version of pie. It just has a simple graham cracker crust, a simple chocolate filling, and then I'm gonna show you how to make an easy kind of marshmallow topping, and then we'll toast it. And I like it because it's a little bit less sweet. Like in a classic s'more, the bulk of it I feel like is the marshmallow, and in this version, the proportions are a little different and the sweetness is dialed down. This recipe has a graham cracker crust, of course, graham cracker. That is baked, and then it has a no-bake chocolate filling. So for the crust, I have 7 ounces of graham crackers. That's about 13 sheets in a resealable bag. Then I have some unsalted butter, an egg yolk, 2 tablespoons of sugar, a little bit of kosher salt, 1 1/4 cups heavy cream, and 6 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate. Behind me, I'll go over this a little bit later. I have ingredients for the marshmallow topping, which in the book is a separate recipe. And as far as special equipment, you'll need a 9-inch fluted removable bottom tart pan. You could also just do it in a 9-inch pie plate, but not deep dish. Then I have a saucepan, a hand mixer, a rolling pin for crushing the graham crackers, but you could use the bottom of a heavy saucepan, and that's pretty much it. So I'm gonna start with the crust for the s'mores tart. I just turned my oven onto 350 because we're gonna bake just the crust. I'm a big believer in baking any kind of crumb crust, even if there's a no-bake filling, because it's just gonna help to set everything and make a sturdy base for the filling. So the first thing I'm gonna do is melt the butter. And you could just do that in the microwave, but I'm gonna use a saucepan for the ganache anyway, so that's just, I'm not making more dishes. And while that is melting, I am going to crush my graham crackers. Graham crackers are kind of like a whole wheat, very lightly sweetened, biscuity biscuit kind of thing. For this to be a s'more tart, it kind of has to be graham cracker. But if you wanted to make this tart or pie with a different like cookie base, you could. So you could use anything that's super light and crisp. A digestive biscuit, if you're in the UK, would be great. It has a similar kind of like whole wheat flavor. You could also use ginger snaps as long as they are like a very crisp, light ginger snap, not the like, you know, kind of crunchy, denser ones. And I'm just crushing all of the cookies. And I like to designate a bag that I use over and over again for crumb crust. So I just rinse it out, let it dry, and put it back in the drawer. And I'm rolling over it with my rolling pin. And then once you've kind of crushed everything, I recommend lifting up the bag and giving it a shake, because when you shake it, the largest pieces kind of rise to the top, and then when you lay it on its side again, you have all of those off to one end of the bag, and then you can re-crush, because I want all of these to be nice and uniform and finely crushed. I don't like to make crumb crust in a food processor because I find that they can be too finely ground. And if it's too finely ground, then what ends up happening is you get a crust that is like a little bit dense and also can be a little bit greasy and will not really hold its shape in the pan. And I don't know, as I like bake more and more, I find more and more enjoyment out of doing stuff by hand. So this is the consistency that you want. Finely ground, pretty uniform, and there might be a couple of slightly larger pieces, but those will just kind of blend into the crust. Now, I'm gonna add my other crust ingredients. I have a half teaspoon of kosher salt. So then I'm gonna add sugar. And the sugar is important because that is going to help contribute binding to the crust when combined with the butter. So I'm gonna scrape the butter in as well. Now when you heat butter and sugar together and you bake the crust, it kind of fuses and it creates this firm base. And if you were to skip the sugar and just do butter, because maybe you're trying to dial down the sweetness a little bit, it wouldn't hold together as well. So that was 5 tablespoons of melted butter. Keep that saucepan, because I'm gonna use that for the ganache, the filling. And then I have an ingredient that I like to add. It's not an ingredient that's typically in a graham cracker crust, but I like it because it adds a lot of binding. So this is just 1 large egg yolk. A really common piece of recipe language that I use and that I see used a lot is mix until it looks like wet sand. And what that basically means is things will be kind of moistened, and when you like squeeze it in your hand, it will hold together. So once you're at that point, I actually stop stirring and then I switch to my hands. And I like to kind of rub the mixture between my palms to really get it evenly mixed. I don't have any big clumps or any dry patches. And now I'm going to press it into my tart pan. So I like to do the sides of the pan first. So I scatter about half the crumbs into the bottom of the pan, spread it out and scatter it toward the sides, trying to be as even as you can. And then once I have the crumbs scattered around the perimeter, I'll press it against the sides. I like to use a straight-sided 1 cup measure. I do angle the measuring cup so that it's running parallel to the sides. It's firmly pressed against the sides, but I left the top sort of intentionally a little bit looser so it looks kind of natural and also gives me a little extra height. So then I have the rest of those crumbs, which are going to go into the bottom. I can use that same measuring cup. If you don't have a straight-sided measuring cup, you can just use like a water glass. Anything with the straight sides that's round. I use my palm to get it into an even layer and to begin to compact it. And now I'm just kind of smoothing it out with that measuring cup and going over the sides a little bit again, because I'm pushing a little bit of that bottom crust up the sides to even it out. I'm going to bake this until it's going to be fragrant, and I'm going to notice that the edge is going to be a little bit darker than it is now. And that should be like, it's just right around 15 minutes, so the range is 13 to 18 minutes. And I'm going to throw it on a sheet tray because I don't want to disturb that edge as I take it in and out of the oven. The filling is basically ganache. So ganache is a combination of chocolate and cream, and it's all melted together, and it makes this like incredibly smooth, rich filling. If you ever had a chocolate truffle, that creamy chocolate like center that's ganache. And there is one secret to this filling. So when you just make a straight ganache, which is generally equal weights chocolate and cream, it is very rich and it can be very dense, which is often the desired texture. But for this tart, I like to lighten it a little bit. So I have here all my cream. It's 1 1/4 cups total. I'm going to pour 3/4 of a cup, leaving about a 1/2 cup, and that's for whipping later. So this 1/2 cup of cream I'm going to return to the fridge because I want it cold so I can whip it. And oh my God, I actually have room in my fridge this time. It's a miracle. So this cream I'm going to get warming on the stove. If you add cream to your chocolate and it's too hot, that can cause the chocolate to break. So chocolate is a very temperature sensitive ingredient. So I just want the cream to be like barely bubbling around the sides and steaming, but not quite boiling. Put on medium heat. So then I have my chocolate. If you're using bar chocolate, obviously you want to go ahead and chop it. I'm gonna add a pinch of salt, not making it salty, but just bringing out all the flavors. Then I'm gonna add those 4 tablespoons of butter that I didn't add to the crust, and this has been cut into pieces. So this was just kind of rippling beneath the surface and steaming, so I could tell it was about to come to a boil. And I'm gonna wait about 20 or 30 seconds just so that it can cool off a little bit. Again, I don't wanna like shock the chocolate with something boiling. I'm gonna pour this over my chocolate, and make sure you're working in a large bowl because you will whip this mixture in here actually. So scrape all that in. And then I like to make sure the chocolate is totally submerged because the heat from the cream is going to melt the chocolate and of course the butter. And then that's just going to gently melt. So I'm gonna let that sit for a few minutes. And I can smell the crust, so I know that it's done. It smells toasty and delicious. It is darkened around the edge. It's gonna be firm to the touch when you press it, so that egg has set and also that butter and sugar has fused together, so now I have this nice sturdy crust that will be sliceable. I'm gonna take it off of the sheet tray and just put it on my rack so it can cool. You do not want it to be hot when you put the filling in. That's really important. So here's my ganache, which has been sitting for several minutes. It has not fully melted because I'm not using a ton of cream, and I left those pieces of chocolate really large. So if you need to, you can always rewarm your ganache if it's not fully melted. But be very careful because It's very easy to overheat ganache, and as I said, it will break if it gets too hot. So a safer way to do it would be to put it over a double boiler, but I feel like I can just zap it. But if you're gonna do the microwave, I would only do 10-second bursts and stir in between, just so you know that you're not getting it too hot. And you wanna stop before the chocolate is fully melted and just let it kind of carry over. No free advertising.
That's right.
But we will take sponsorships, and I love. This is mostly melted. I did 3 10-second bursts. So again, be very careful in the microwave. If you're a little bit concerned, just use a double boiler because it's a much gentler heat. But you can see that I have a little bit of unmelted chocolate, but as I stir, that is going to finish melting. I'm gonna have this smooth ganache. If your ganache looks like it has little beads of fat that are collecting in the top, that means it's broken. But it's okay because there is a remedy. What you can do is add 2 tablespoons of cool tap water and whisk it really vigorously, and that should bring it back together. What you want is ganache that looks like this. So fully melted, really glossy, really smooth. The crust is cool, that's important. And I'm ready to whip that remaining 1/2 cup of heavy cream. So I'm gonna start with my hand mixer, and it's only a 1/2 cup, so it whips really quickly. You could do this by hand. I'm gonna use a larger bowl than this. So I'm just gonna whip this until I get soft peaks. It doesn't take long with just a 1/2 cup of cream. So once you start to see it holding the marks of the whisk, oop, hello. That's when you know you're pretty much there. And I wanna set that aside. And now I'm gonna use, without washing the beaters, I'm gonna use the mixer to whip the ganache a little bit. This ganache has been sitting out, and so it's come to room temperature, so it's mostly set. So this will take very little time. If your ganache is still warm, then this will take a few more minutes. But basically, you wanna beat it until you get to this point where it kind of looks like chocolate pudding. So it's gonna hold the marks of the whisk, and it's gonna be thickened, but still glossy. And now I'm going to add that softly whipped cream and fold everything together. And I think that the cream not only helps to add air into the mixture, so it has an almost moussey or mousse-like texture, but it also just cuts through some of that really intense chocolatey flavor, which to me was like a little bit too much. So you want to stir this together, or fold it rather. So folding is a gentle mixing technique so that it doesn't deflate the cream. And once it's streak-free like this, you're going to scrape it into your cooled crust, and then just spread it into your tart. Now the surface is going to be covered by the marshmallow, so it doesn't really matter what this looks like. I just want to get it into an even layer all the way to the edge of the crust. Ganache, when you whip it, actually sets very quickly, so this just has to sit for 15 minutes or so, and you'll notice that that filling is going to firm up quite a bit. So you can just set that off to the side, and then while that's setting, I'm gonna make my marshmallow topping. This is an easy version of marshmallow because there's no candy thermometer required. So there is no cooking of a sugar syrup to a particular temperature. If traditional egg white based marshmallows are Italian meringue set with gelatin, then you can think of this as Swiss meringue set with gelatin. So Swiss meringue is made by taking egg whites and sugar, beating them together over a double boiler until dissolved. So this is that same method. It's a lot more approachable and just sort of easier in general. And then we add some gelatin. I have 3 large egg whites, about 105 grams, 2 tablespoons light corn syrup, 2.5 teaspoons powdered unflavored gelatin, the stuff in the little box at the grocery store, bit of kosher salt, and 2/3 of a cup granulated sugar, vanilla extract, and this is apple cider vinegar. I don't have cream of tartar. So the first step is to soften the gelatin. Unflavored powdered gelatin comes in these little granules, and the granules need to be mixed with water so they can hydrate and absorb the water before it can be melted. So I'm gonna take a 1/4 cup of very cold tap water. If your tap water isn't that cold, I would add an ice cube. Our tap water is freezing cold in winter. So a 1/4 cup of cold water, just into the bottom of a small bowl. And I'm gonna sprinkle my 2.5 teaspoons of unflavored gelatin over top. And I like to hold the bowl up high so that the granules kind of spread out as they fall. And they will immediately start to swell and hydrate, and it will go from this kind of solid, opaque beige color to translucent. And don't stir. It's better to just kind of let the granules fall because you'll get lots of clumps if you stir. So you can see it's kind of gotten wrinkly as that gelatin is hydrating. And gelatin is what gives marshmallow its set at room temperature. So I'm gonna let that sit. The gelatin needs to hydrate for about 10 minutes before we can melt it. And in the meantime, you wanna get your double boiler going. I have that water coming to a simmer. I don't want it to be boiling. And then you wanna grab a heat-proof bowl. I'm using glass so you can see what it looks like, but metal is actually better because metal is a better heat conductor. And you're gonna set the bowl on top of the saucepan, and you just don't want the bottom of the bowl to be touching the water underneath. And if it is touching, either get a bigger bowl, a smaller saucepan, or dump out some of the water. So I'm gonna let this hydrate. You can see that the granules have already turned translucent. I like to melt gelatin on its own because I wanna make sure it's completely melted, because if it's not, then I'm not gonna have that same setting power and the marshmallow might be kind of loose. So I'm gonna melt that, and then I'm gonna add the rest of my ingredients, warm everything together while whisking over the double boiler, and then I'm gonna use my hand mixer to bring it all together. Okay, so here's the gelatin. When you press on it, it's firm and bouncy, so that's how you know that it's hydrated. I have my double boiler. The water is not boiling. It is steaming, but I barely even have bubbles, so you want the water to be just below a simmer. I'm gonna scrape the gelatin into the bowl. You can see that it comes out as like a completely solid piece. And it is going to start melting immediately. So I'm just gonna sit here and stir it gently. You wanna make sure that it's completely liquid. Just make sure that you don't have any bits that haven't melted yet. So this is in a good place. You don't wanna let this boil. I don't think that you're at risk of that because it's over a double boiler, but you just don't wanna get gelatin too hot because that will also destroy the setting power. So I'm gonna take the bowl off of the heat, and I like to let it cool for just a couple seconds off the heat before I add the other ingredients because I'm adding egg whites to it. So I'm gonna add to this a pinch of salt. I'm going to add those 2 tablespoons of light corn syrup. I'm gonna add my sugar. And I like to add the ingredients in this order because adding all of these things before the egg whites is gonna help cool down the mixture so that I don't end up cooking the egg whites when I add them to the bowl. So go ahead and stir all of that together. Then in go the egg whites and a little bit of that vinegar, just a half teaspoon. So I'm gonna grab my whisk, and the bowl goes back onto the double boiler. So you want to whisk constantly over the heat. That sugar is gonna dissolve in the egg whites, and it is going to become kind of whitish and opaque. And also it's gonna have a really sticky texture. That's a good way to put it. So that will take several minutes. If you are concerned about the egg whites not being pasteurized, then you can use a thermometer at this stage just to make sure that it warms above 160. And at that point, the egg whites become pasteurized. I just pulled this egg white mixture off of the double boiler, and you can see it's become kind of opaque. And a good test to see if you're done, if you're not gonna take it up to 160, is just to make sure that all the sugar is dissolved. And that, I'm sure that will most likely be the case, but what you can do is just take a little dab of it, rub it between your fingertips, and it should be totally smooth with no grit. If there's any grit, it means you haven't dissolved all the sugar, and then you should just keep it on the heat a little bit longer. I'm gonna switch to my hand mixer. I cleaned the beaters really well because you don't want any grease or any residue on the beaters after you make the filling. And now I'm gonna start to whip this. It should really probably be in a bigger bowl, but let's see how this goes. And basically I'm gonna whip this into a meringue. So I'm gonna start kind of on low and slowly increase to high. I have my vanilla, which I'm gonna add toward the end. So I've been beating this for probably 5 minutes or so, and it's getting there, but it's not quite done. You can see that it's voluminous, probably doubled or even tripled in volume. I'm gonna add the vanilla. I think it's like a teaspoon or 2, but it's not quite there. It's a little bit too loose now. It's not gonna hold its shape. So I'm gonna continue to beat it on high speed until I get nice, tall peaks. With this hand mixer not being the most powerful and this not being the largest bowl, I probably beat this for like a solid 12 minutes, but it just requires patience. It will firm up. I can get folds and it doesn't just disappear into the surface. So I'm gonna scrape this onto my chocolate filling. This is never gonna firm up like a stiff meringue, so it's always gonna be kind of like swooshy. Now I have that marshmallow topping on there and it will start to set, and I like to just kind of go in with a spoon and make some nice texture in the surface there. I wanna let this set for a little bit. I can tell it's already starting to set before I torch it. And the topping really ideally should sit out at cool room temperature for, so ideally a couple hours before you serve it, because that gelatin will kind of slowly set. It needs a little bit of time. And that's how you'll get like a nice clean slice. So cool room temperature. If it's really warm, you might want to pop it in the fridge, but it can just sit out. It hasn't been a matter of hours. I would say it's been maybe 25 minutes, but I can tell from the particular sheen on the marshmallow that it has set. And when I do this, see how the whole thing is looking pretty solid. So I'm gonna go ahead and torch it. And when you're toasting meringue, it toasts very, very quickly. So keep it moving is what I'm trying to say. And I don't recommend trying to do this under the broiler because what ends up happening is you end up burning the ring of crust around the edge as well as any exposed fillings. So this is much better done with a torch. If you don't have a torch, you can just leave it like this. There's nothing wrong with this. You just don't get that toasted meringue flavor.
Oh, another problem with the torch.
Nope, no torch problem. When it's turned all the way in the off, oh, there it goes. Okay. I toasted the top pretty thoroughly because I like having all that toasted meringue flavor on there, but it's up to you. I don't like my marshmallow like totally incinerated for a s'more, but I like a lot of char on it. The marshmallow's a little bit warm from the torch, so I'm gonna let that cool off, but then we're gonna cut a couple slices and taste our s'mores pie. So I'm going to release the tart from the ring, which should happen very easily. I'm gonna slice a piece of the tart. I feel like, even though it hasn't been a couple hours, the marshmallow is set nicely. So I'm just going to slice all the way down and through. If you want really clean slices, you can wipe off your knife in between cuts. Pretty good looking slice after a couple attempts. Okay, time to taste. Definitely neater to eat than an actual s'more. What I like about it is the filling is intensely chocolatey, but it is also kind of light, extremely silky and smooth. Plus you get the kind of like bouncy sweetness and a little bit of toasty sugar flavor from the topping. And then you get that not very sweet, like super crunchy graham cracker base. And I like that it's very clearly a s'mores tart. And I think it has mass appeal. So like kids, adults, everyone, but it also kind of just feels like a sophisticated chocolate tart all at the same time with a little marshmallow topping and graham cracker crust. It really hits all the textural notes of the s'more, but less sweet, something super shareable, definitely less messy. I think it's actually kind of grown up because of how dialed back the sweetness is, but something that's also going to give you that whole childhood nostalgia. And nostalgia is something I really focused on in the book. There's a lot of like really homey, home-style desserts. Shout out to my brother-in-law, Nick, who loves a s'more and encouraged me to do a s'mores dessert in the book. So here it is. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Happy Pie Day.
Happy Pie Day.